If you feel lost with your exam preparations and you don't know how to organize yourself and you feel panic as exams approach, then this video is for you. We will build a super useful calendar, make a study plan from scratch, decide what to study each day, learn how to revise so that you don't forget, and learn how to use flashcards in your workflow. You can use the timestamps to jump to different steps. Now, this strategy that I developed combines what I learned through my own trial and errors, my observations as a teacher of hundreds of my students' study practices, and books I've read on time management and exam prep. There is no need for you to panic and pull all-nighters. By being smart about how you spend your time, you can feel in control of your studies, whether you're in school or university. Now, I struggled as a student, but I got much better over time. At one point, I was even doing 2 degrees at the same time, which was stressful but manageable because I had the right system. I've made this calendar available to you as a PDF document so you can print it out at home. The download link is in the video description below. If you don't have a printer, you can use these measurements to draw it with a ruler. Or you can scrap the idea of making your own calendar and use a digital one instead, but I'll explain in a few minutes why that might not be the best idea. And if you're just a few days away from your exams, then follow the tips I've laid out in the video right here. Now, let's get organized. Now, the template cuts the calendar into standard A4 sheets. Each month spans 3 pages and each page covers 2 months. You can start your calendar in any month you like and leave out the months you don't need. Once printed, you could tape the sheets onto a wall or use a pinboard if it's large enough. But I prefer using cardboard because I can cut it into the right shape and move the calendar around. It requires a little bit more work, but it's worth it. I got cardboard from the local electronics store because they tend to have larger boxes than supermarkets. Now, make sure to reinforce bendy bits with a second layer on the back. But why go through all this hassle of building a calendar rather than using an online version? Well, let me explain with an example. I take my vitamin D tablets every day, but I forget about my zinc tablets. That's because my vitamin D sits on my desk and my zinc tablets in a drawer. When you have a calendar on your wall, you can't help but automatically look at it every day. It's impossible to forget about it, unlike an online calendar, which you have to actively remember to open. As a consequence, you won't use it that often. Just like my zinc tablets. This is why they're sitting on my desk right now. If you choose to go for an online calendar, you can use my template, which works fine, but using a standard calendar is easier to edit. The downside is that you don't get a bird's eye view of the entire year, and it's not as easy to scribble in it as you please. First, we want to cancel out all the days between now and your exams during which you cannot study, for example, holidays. And lastly, establish a buffer of about 10 days just before your exams. We want to make sure that you finish all your studies, all your coursework before the buffer so that there is enough time to make final adjustments just before the exam. So now you should know how many days you have left between now and your final exam. Now you have to decide how many hours you can study on a weekday and on a weekend day. Let's say you can do 2 hours per weekday and 4 hours per weekend day. Add all of those hours together to get your total time budget. Think of this like a bank account for time. Every time you study, you're taking time out of this budget. All right, on to spreading your coursework across the calendar. Let's use math as an example. Let's say you have a textbook with 6 chapters. Simply divide the number of study days by the number of chapters. This will get you the number of days you have for each chapter. Place goalposts along your calendar to mark where you should be done with each chapter. But feel free to move around these goalposts depending on how much time you want to allocate to each of the chapters. Do the same with all your other subjects and assign a different color to each subject. Great. Now let's work on step 3, what to study each day. Now list all of your subjects and decide how much time in percentages you want to allocate to each. For example, math is our biggest worry and English our least concern. Take your percentages, convert them to decimals, and multiply each of them with your total time budget number. That will give you the number of hours you have for each of your subjects. And take those hours and spread them across your calendar. And now, you're pretty much done. So what does your daily routine look like with this calendar? So you come home from university or school, you finish any assignments you need to work on, and then you start your work on your calendar assignments. If you finish one, cross it off the list. If you didn't finish an item, then leave it uncrossed so that you don't forget about it. Stick to your goalposts. If you want to cover all of your content, you have to stick to them. That means you have to be consistent in your efforts. It's not necessary to study 10 hours straight. If you do a bit every day, small bits of effort over long periods of time add up to massive improvements. On to step 4, how to study using your calendar. It's not enough to just revise content once. I guarantee that most of the things you studied in February will be forgotten by July. You have to repeatedly shuffle the content forward, making sure it doesn't get forgotten. Memory naturally fades over time, but there are ways to stop that from happening. Check out this graph. It shows experimental results from Hermann Ebbinghaus, one of the first psychologists investigating memory. In his experiments, he memorized letter sequences and then tried to remember those after hours, days, and even weeks. His memory faded quickly, but if he allowed himself to look at the letter sequences after some time again, his forgetting slowed down, and he was able to remember more for longer. Now, the same goes for you. You need to revisit your content regularly to make it stick in your mind. It's like making a strong rope. Revising is like adding another string to the rope. Great, now we know that we have to revise. But what's the best way to revise? Well, 84% of students study by rereading their notes. It is by far the most popular study method, but it's actually a very poor method. What happens is that students mistake recognizing notes while reading them with knowing the content, but those things are not the same. If I were to take away your notes and quiz you on them, you will likely have trouble remembering them. Instead of rereading notes, you want to hide them and create questions to check if you memorized your notes correctly. If you can still remember them, then you have truly memorized something. The best way of doing this is by building flashcards. We talked about this in a video called The Best Study Method, so go ahead and watch that one if you want to learn more about how to revise effectively. Say you have a bunch of flashcards. What you should do is set aside 10 to 15 minutes every day to revise the content from previous weeks. And as the weeks go by, you will have more and more content to revise. Now, you can't revise everything all the time, so you need to focus more on the things that you still don't know well. You can very easily do this by creating 2 piles. Things you got right during revision go on pile 1, and things you got wrong go on pile 2. Over time, your pile 1 will grow as things get pushed from pile 2 over to pile 1. But if pile 2 starts growing and growing, it means you're not revising enough, so you might want to increase that time, say from 10 minutes to 20 minutes. Now, content from pile 2 should be revised more often, say every 1 to 2 days, while the pile 1 should be revised maybe every week. This is how you focus on things you still have trouble with remembering. And lastly, remember that buffer we created? This is the time when you try to get all the content from pile 2 onto pile 1. So go through all the cards again and find the ones that are still not quite there yet. At the end of the buffer period, all of your content should be on pile 1. So now you have a general plan, a strategy on how to get from where you are to where you want to be. But if you still feel stuck, you can book a one-on-one session with me to work out your particular needs. The link is in the video description below. If you have any general questions, drop a comment below. I guarantee I answer every single question I get. So if you haven't, subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell to get more of this kind of content. Until then, I'll see you in the next one.